Good afternoon. Yes, echo. Welcome to our seminar today. This seminar came from a need that we found with our researchers, or even inside Hadasit in our group, that the whole issue of AI technologies and how to AI-based technologies, algorithm-based technologies, it's an issue that it's not very clear if we can patent, how can we patent, how can we protect the intellectual property around these kind of technologies. So our goal with our seminar today is basically two-way. One, to clarify the issue of the patentability of algorithm-based technologies. But although I'm biased and I am a patent attorney, our goal here is not to convince anyone that we have to have patents for protecting our software-based, AI-based technologies. Before we start, I just want to say that we will have a Q&A, or we'll try to have a Q&A session after every speaker. Because this is a hybrid event, people who are attending through Zoom, please send your questions through the chat. And Masha, at the end of each talk, will read them out loud, and we'll try to address your questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker of today, Greg Kirsch. Greg is a U.S. patent attorney. He is the head of IP for Smith Gambrell Russell. Greg has many years of experience in IP, in software technologies, and Greg, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Adriana. It's great to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I was last in Israel in November. I plan to be back a little bit later this year, but I'm currently in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and it's great to participate and to be involved in this. As Adriana mentioned, I'm Greg Kirsch, and I head up the IP department at Smith Gambrell Russell, an American law firm with offices around the United States and also in Europe as well. And we've got about 30 IP attorneys, about 18 patent attorneys and patent agents. And I've been working in this field for about 32 years now, and focused very heavily on software type inventions. I'm a patent attorney by training with computer engineering background. And so let me share my screen here. I've got a presentation that hopefully I can pull up here. And can everybody can see my screen? Hope the answer is yes. If not, let me know. So we're going to talk about strategies for patent protection for computer software in general, and AI, artificial intelligence in particular, in the biomedical sciences. And I'm also going to talk. You'll see that the subnote here is separating myth from reality, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, as you probably know, with patents for computer technology in general and software and AI in particular. In general, and also as applied to biomedical inventions. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to try to clarify a few things and present some case studies as well. So hopefully you can see that I move to the next slide. If not, let me know. And I know sometimes Zoom can be a little bit finicky in how it operates. But I'm going to just spend a few minutes on some slides, just some introductory slides here. As you all probably know, since you're operating in this field, software and artificial intelligence can take many forms when it comes to biomedical inventions. It can be standalone software, what we oftentimes refer to as software as a medical device. This is software that's used for medical purposes, but not part of a medical device per se. It could even be software used in collaboration with drugs, with pharmaceuticals. It could be bioinformatics or medical informatics, the study of biological data or patient data. It could be medical care management software. This is all standalone software as opposed to software that might be embedded in a medical device, what we oftentimes call software in a medical device. These are two terms of art that you're probably familiar with, SAMD and SIMD. Software as a medical device, where the software itself is basically the medical device for purposes of the FDA, et cetera, or software that actually controls or allows you to use or calibrate a medical device, what we call software in a medical device. And software, as we also know, can be used to design biomedical inventions, medical devices, and other types of devices and hardware. It can be used in the production, testing, quality control, et cetera. And then, of course, lastly, this is oftentimes forgotten, but software can be used in communication technology to control the communications that go back and forth between different medical devices and biomedical technology in general. So not necessarily the biomedical device itself, but rather how it communicates with the outside world. So there's all types of ways that software can be used, both internally and externally. And so I just wanted to kind of set the stage for the rest of my presentation. With respect to software, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here, but as you probably know, since you're in this field, there's different types of software. There's conventional software, which kind of takes a top-down approach. It performs computers can be programmed to perform specific tasks. And then there's artificial intelligence, which is a type of software. And again, I've grossly oversimplified here, AI, but typically the way I like to explain it is, artificial intelligence is not programmed to perform a particular task, but rather to learn to perform tasks, with data labeling, to kind of put context to data, machine learning, finding patterns, feedback loops, et cetera. Again, I'm oversimplifying this, and some of you may be, artificial intelligence experts, which, you might be looking at this and saying this is a gross oversimplification, but, given time constraints, I just wanted to kind of explain that artificial intelligence is a subset of sorts of software in general. And for purposes of patentability, which we'll talk about in a moment, the different types of software, whether it's just conventional software or AI, are sometimes treated a little differently in how the patent office and even the courts will look at patentability of these kinds of inventions. I think the audience here there's a spectrum of you. Some of you may be quite familiar with patents in general and the U.S. in particular. Some of you may not. So I'm just going to kind of give a brief overview, very high level, but it's important to understand, how patentability works in the United States. There's three main tests for patentability. The invention has to be useful and it has to be of the proper subject matter. That's what we oftentimes call 101, the 101 test. By the way, are you seeing the, I just realized that I have a disconnect on this end. Are you seeing the slide that says patentability at the top right now?
We're not.
Okay, so have you not seen it advancing?
Yeah, it's not advancing.
Okay, thanks for, I just realized that I'm moving it forward, but it's not advancing. Let me do one other thing. I think I can fix this real quick, just a moment. I'm just gonna pull up the non, okay, here we go. Do you see where it says patentability now? At the top?
We do.
Okay. All right, good. Yeah, sorry about that.
They said here to make this into presentation mode.
Yeah, I did make it into presentation mode, but sometimes when you put it in presentation mode, it does not allow you to advance the slides when it's being projected. So okay. If it's okay, I'm gonna keep it not in presentation mode just so we can see the slides from slide to slide.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So everybody sees. So I'll just kind of go back real quick. This was the first slide that I think you did see, but then I talked about software versus AI in general, and then the requirements for patentability is what I'm on now. But you see the slides moving now, right?
Right.
Okay, great. Okay, so for patentability in the United States, we have utility and subject matter, what we call 101. This is the statute, the law, the particular law in the United States. And then we also have novelty and non-obviousness. These are the three tests for patentability. The invention has to be useful, and it has to be of a certain subject matter, but it also has to be new, novel, and also non-obvious. And so there are particular challenges that we face when we're dealing with software and artificial intelligence, not just for biomedical inventions, but for any kind of technology that uses software and AI. But there are some particular challenges for biomedical inventions, and the nature of software itself kind of implicates all three of these tests: utility, subject matter, novelty, and non-obviousness. We'll talk about that in a moment here. So let's take the first one: utility and subject matter. So to be patent eligible, so before you even get into whether invention is new and non-obvious, to be patent eligible, the invention has to be useful. It has to have utility, which has to be a credible utility. And usually in the biomedical space, software, whether it's internal to a medical device, for example, or whether it's a software as a medical device or some other type of auxiliary type function, usually that aspect is fairly easy to show. Since we're dealing with biomedical inventions, there's usually a use that can be fairly readily shown. The difficult part gets into the subject matter, where we're under 35 USC 101, which is the statute, the law that indicates what type of inventions are patentable. To be patentable, the invention needs to be a process, machine, manufacture, or composition of matter. Not surprisingly, software and artificial intelligence typically fall under the process or machine category. So that's fairly straightforward. However, over the years in the United States, the courts have interpreted subject matter eligibility to exclude certain types of inventions or discoveries. For example, laws of nature, which things like gravity, for example, or that would also fall under natural phenomenon. So laws of nature, natural phenomenon, abstract ideas. So, for example, gravity or a mathematical formula equals mc squared, or the relationship between one thing in nature and another thing in nature, or just simple concepts like business methodologies. Taken by themselves, those are typically excluded from patent eligibility. Those are not tangible enough. Those are not technical enough to be patent eligible under this requirement. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's actually applied in fact with software and AI. One myth that I hear a lot, and I work with a lot of software companies, small startups to very large multinational companies, and a lot of universities. I do a lot of work with these kinds of entities, and I constantly hear the myth of software is not patentable. I'm not interested in pursuing it, and that really is not true. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. And Adriana mentioned earlier that nobody's trying to convince anybody that you should get a patent on software, but before that decision's made, you have to understand how the rules work, because in some cases, software is, or at least aspects of software is readily patentable. In other cases, it's not. And it all depends on how you actually define the invention. So you may have all heard of a case from about 8 years ago, the Alice Corp case. It's a US Supreme Court decision from 2014 that basically tried to quantify and tried to create additional rules as to what is patentable and what is not, especially with respect to software. And if as long as the invention is claimed as a process or machine, which it typically would be with software or computer technology, and as long as it does not fall into one of these judicial exceptions per se, laws of nature, natural phenomena, abstract ideas, then software can be patentable. And even if it does fall, even if aspects of the claim fall into a judicial exception. So for example, let me back up a slide. Let's say you have a mathematical formula that is used in the invention. Let's say to control a medical device. Let's say it's some kind of medical device. It's controlled with a computer processor and software. There might be artificial intelligence built into it, maybe not, it doesn't matter. But the fact that there is a mathematical formula at play, if that mathematical formula, for example, is used for practical application, for example, to regulate the flow of blood, or to apply electrical impulses to control your heartbeat or something like that. And the fact that it's using a mathematical formula to do that, but the end result is some practical application of it, then that would basically take something which would otherwise fall under one of these exceptions, law of nature, natural phenomena, abstract ideas, and make it so it doesn't, because you have a practical application of that, let's say, law of nature, or that natural phenomena. So in addition, let's say you have some kind of judicial exception here where otherwise the invention would not be patent eligible. But if you have additional steps, let's say the result of that is to feed into, one device feeds the output that's created with mathematics, for example, into another device, and then that other device then performs different functions to operate a medical device of some sort. That would be another way that something which might otherwise be a judicial exception, where patent eligibility would not occur, would suddenly become patent eligible if that were to occur. So as you can see, it's all how it's claimed. You may be familiar with claiming in patent applications and patents. It's in addition to describing the details of how to actually make and use the invention, we actually define the scope of what it is you think you invented. And if you define the scope purely in mathematical terms, for example, you're probably going to get rejected at the patent office. Or if the patent sees its way through and is granted, it'll probably be held invalid as a judicial exception by the courts or by the patent office. But if you claim it with these practical applications or these extra elements that make it, to pull it out of the judicial exception, then it can be patentable. So to say, just to say software is patentable or is not patentable is almost a meaningless thing to say, because it all depends on how exactly you are defining your invention. Are you incorporating patent eligible aspects? If you are, then it likely is patent eligible. So let me give you a little stat here, a little statistic. This is something that I looked up on the U.S. Patent Office website, and I found it very interesting. I'm going to show you two slides here. The first one is the percentage share of U.S. issued patents that claim software-related inventions. So, the software may not be the heart of the invention overall, but the invention has some aspect to it that is software-driven, computer-driven. And this is not just for biomedical inventions. This is for all patents filed in the United States and all issued patents in particular. So, we start off in 2002 and end in 2020. And as you can see, the percentage share of U.S. patents that include software-related inventions has steadily increased. And this is even after 2014. This is the Alice Corp decision, which actually kind of made it harder to get patents on software-related inventions. But even so, there was a small dip right here. But since then, it's gone up. It's now in almost 65% of all issued patents have some software aspect to it. And this goes across the board with all types of inventions. This is a fairly high percentage if you think about every single invention, biotech, chemistry, mechanical, electronics, whatever it might be. It's a fairly high percentage. I was actually quite surprised to see this percentage. And the next slide here shows not the percentages, but the total number of U.S. issued patents that claim software-related inventions. And as you can see, it has risen from about 75,000 per year in 2002 to now about 225,000. So quite an increase over just a period of 20 or so years, not even 20 years. Small dip between 2019 and 2020, but I believe that the numbers for 2021, which I've not yet seen, have it going up even higher. So, patents for software-related inventions continue to increase, and that also includes biomedical inventions. So another myth that I hear quite a bit is in the biomedical space. I hear that people say, well, when pursuing patents, it's oftentimes more important. It's usually more important to pursue patent protection on the biomedical technology hardware as opposed to the software itself. Let's protect the hardware itself, and the software itself may not be as important to protect. This depends. It sometimes is true, it's sometimes not true, this myth. But more often than not, the more we see software kind of embedded into all types of biomedical applications, we're seeing it more often than not true. Because in some cases, the hardware itself might be improved, but in some cases, you have existing hardware, existing biomedical technology that has been improved purely by creating additional software. And oftentimes these days, that includes artificial intelligence built in. And oftentimes the new and non-obvious aspects are the software AI itself. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. But again, this myth, which I hear quite a bit, I hear this from university clients. I also hear this from companies of all sizes, very sophisticated, larger companies and startups as well. Simply not true. Let me give you a little case study. This might explain it further. I do a lot of work with universities in Israel and all over the United States. I think my firm represents about 20 different universities where we help them get patents and help them license patents. And just in the last few years, I was working with a major U.S. university. I won't name the name, but we were working on some computed tomography imaging inventions. This is basically, as you probably know, computed tomography is a medical imaging technique where you can get detailed internal images of the body for diagnostic purposes, et cetera. And the inventor of this university developed this very interesting artificial intelligence technique to reconstruct images and to highlight and augment the images in new ways. They were using it for diagnostic purposes to identify different, I think in this case it was different cancers and other types of diseases. But the images themselves, as created by the X-ray device, were not sufficient, so they had to augment them. And this inventor, this professor at this university, created this artificial intelligence technique using deep learning, which is a type of machine learning, to create better image reconstruction. And the patent claims, when we filed the patent application, the claims were directed solely to the software, because the X-ray machine itself, the X-ray system, was old. It was an existing, state of the art, but it was an older system, nothing new there. But the imaging techniques were what was new, completely driven by software and artificial intelligence. And we ended up licensing, the university ended up licensing this patent family. We ended up, I think, with 3 or 4 patents and a couple more that were pending. We licensed it to a major X-ray device manufacturer to use on their existing systems. So that, again, they were not interested in any hardware changes. They were purely interested in the imaging techniques that this inventor had created. So very, very good stuff, very lucrative for the university, a lot of royalty revenue coming in from that. Another example, it was a different university client. They had developed an invention to automate the detection of different eye conditions by looking at somebody's eye using imaging techniques. Using artificial intelligence, they were able to detect different anomalies, and we filed a series of patent applications for them. The patents were granted. We ended up licensing them to a company, that is, in this case, it was kind of a mid-sized company that is further commercializing them, and the patents ended up being a major value point for negotiating with this company, and so far the company is doing very well with this technology. So, again, without the patents that were purely software driven, in this case AI driven, the deal would have never happened. This company would have never been interested in the technology. Again, separating myth from reality. So the biggest challenge is, and I know I'm coming up here on 5-10 minutes left. The biggest challenge, just to kind of wrap things up here, is delineating between the abstract ideas and the practical applications. I mentioned that this is the test for 101, the patent eligibility, and that dividing line is not always clear. And so, we used to see a lot of these rejections. We're not seeing as many now, but we did see a lot of, abstract idea type rejections. And but what we have found is that with careful claim drafting, where we are focusing not just on the abstract ideas, but on the practical applications, we can oftentimes make this a non-issue, that these patent eligibility requirements do not apply, that this is clearly technical enough and practical enough to be patent eligible under 101. And again, as I said, especially with biomedical inventions, we are seeing much fewer rejections at the patent office for these types of inventions, whereas maybe even 4 or 5 years ago we would see quite a bit of them. The case law has developed. The U.S. Patent Office has developed some guidelines that allow us to draft the claims in a way that maximizes the chance that this will not be an issue. The bigger issue, and this is actually not talked about nearly enough, but the biggest issue here is not patent eligibility issues, but really it's novelty and non-obviousness. It's basically comparing the claimed invention to the prior art, because as you probably know, if you're in the space, the most software publishers or most companies, including the biomedical field, that use software either embedded into their medical devices or as standalone software, they oftentimes will only distribute the software in executable form. They will not make the software open source, and available for everybody to see. That there's some exceptions to that, and you'll see some open source type situations, but for the most part, it's closed code. It's code that is written, distributed, embedded in devices, but the source code is not released. That's kind of the crown jewels. And there's no need, if you're selling some medical device that has embedded software, there's no need really to distribute the source code. The device just has to work as it's intended to work. So the biggest issue that we see with software in any field, including biomedical devices or biomedical technology, is the fact that when you file a patent, it may be difficult or impossible to find the best prior art, because the patent office has to review your patent application and claimed invention in light of the prior art, prior publications, prior patents, etc. But if they don't have access to that, because nobody is freely distributing, for the most part, source code, it's hard to know what that state of the art truly is. So what I always recommend to my clients is, let's not rely just on the U.S. Patent Office, the examiner at the patent office, to do prior art searching. Let's do our own searching. And again, it may be hard for us as well to do the searching, because again, other parties are not publishing the details of their code. So let's use competitive intelligence. Let's find maybe inferential ways to figure out what others are doing. And let's also try to predict the scope of the prior art. Even if we don't know for sure what the prior art is, let's at least include some maybe narrower claims that we think will distinguish over what we think that prior art looks like, even if we can't prove it, because that will only serve to increase the quality of the patent. Otherwise, if you're completely relying upon the patent office to do the search for you, you may end up with a patent, but that patent will be so broad, it will be easily attacked later on if you ever assert it. So that's one issue that I think is oftentimes overlooked by many people. Another similar issue, is infringement detection. This really gets into what type of inventions make for good patents. Sometimes you have an incredibly clever invention, which might be very valuable. But if you're not able to detect infringement in a competitor, that patent may have less value, because if you don't know whether, if it's going to be very difficult to determine whether your competitor or a competitor of your licensee is infringing, then sure, you might have a patent, but what are you going to do with it? How are you going to assert it if you need to assert it down the road? So sometimes just observing the operation of an accused system, a competitor's device or process, may not be enough. You may not be able to figure out what's actually happening, especially if it's software related, kind of in the bowels of the device itself, because this is embedded software. The source code is not published, so you have to maybe guess as to how it's actually operating. Now, you can sometimes reverse engineer. We've actually done this for some of our university clients, where we thought that there might be infringement. We've done some reverse engineering, which is allowed, to determine how that accused device might be operating. You can even do that to a degree with software. It's a little harder because you have to do a lot of decompilation and whatnot, but there are ways to do that in some cases. There's also inferential analysis. You can look at what the device is doing and infer, in some cases, not always, but infer how it's operating. Sometimes Greg, you might be wrong about that, but you can do that. I'm sorry?
Greg, we have
yes.
to wrap up.
Okay.
Some people have some questions, so.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm at the end here. This is some takeaway slides, but this is just a repeat of what's been said before. So I can conclude right there.
Masha's telling me that you can go over your key takeaway points quickly.
I can?
That's what Masha said.
Okay. I'll be very quick then. This is just kind of a wrap up of what I've talked about before. Again, software and artificial intelligence can be patentable. There's a lot of patents filed in these areas, including in the biomedical fields. Lots of successful outcomes. We've seen a lot of these with our clients. It's not for everybody, and you have to understand and look at whether it makes sense for your technology, but don't just assume that it does not make sense because software or AI is involved. One thing I'll say, and I didn't really mention this before, but one very common and very effective, it can be very effective approach, is to not just patent what you are doing, what your university or your company is doing, but to look at your competition and see what areas that they are going into that you may be able to get some meaningful patent protection, even if it's not core to what you do as a company or university. And this is often overlooked, but I've seen it play out very effectively, where you can basically block your competition, which might discourage them from coming after you with any patents that they might own. And the last takeaway slide, again, this is just a summary of what we talked about, is with biomedical inventions, software and AI inventions in particular, with the right claim drafting, that's what it's always all about. An invention can be drafted, can have claims drafted correctly or incorrectly. In one case, the claims may be rejected repeatedly as being non-patent eligible. In the other case, they may sail right through. So it's all about claim drafting. And the prior art is a focus that we all need to put into it. Sometimes this is overlooked, but using competitive intelligence and prediction of what prior art might look like, you can create some meaningful patent protection. And finally, the revealing aspect or non-revealing aspect of inventions. Always important to take that into account. You don't want to end up with a patent at the end that you realize is going to be very, very difficult to even detect infringement of, in which case the value of it goes way down. So that is my key takeaways, and I am open to questions.
Anyone? Masha, anyone from the chat?
Hi, Greg. How are you?
Hi, good.
So one question regarding the slides you showed about the numbers of patents that are related to software and AI. It seems
yes.
to me that it's very surprising that in our world in the last 5-6 years, where everything is about software and engineering, the rise is not much higher. It seems to me that it shows that the many technologies in these areas are not patentable at all.
Interesting point. Well, let me go back. This is the total number of patents. Let me go back one slide to the percentage share, and you'll see it's almost 65. It's like 64% as of 2020, and that's a fairly, in my mind, that's a fairly high percentage overall. If you think about all the different types of inventions that people pursue patents on, it's not just devices or computer-related inventions. It's biotechnology, it's pure mechanical inventions, it's chemical inventions. So I think it's if you look just at those types of inventions where software could play an important part, I think I agree with you. I think I'm surprised it may not be even higher than this, and it probably is. But this includes every type of inventions, from biotechnology to chemistry to mechanics, et cetera. And so if you look at every type of invention, whereas I think it makes more sense that this is probably an appropriate number.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker today, who is Dr. Shai Rosenberg. Dr. Rosenberg is a neuro-oncologist, and he's the head of the computational medicine services here at Hadassah. And please, Shai.
Thank you. Can you put it on presentation mode? Well, hi, good afternoon. I would like to talk today about one of my artificial intelligence projects in the laboratory. We used to treat 10 years ago, we used to treat cancer as one size fits all, but we now know that every patient has his own cancer mutation profile. You can see that this is an example of patient of mine, and she has mutation in 3 different genes, several mutation, and we can also prescribe some proposed medication. This is what about precision medicine is. The problem is that this is the tip of the iceberg. They report on the 3 or 5 mutations that are surely pathogenic. They are surely participate in the process of. Thank you. Is it better? Okay. Okay. Actually, I can do without it. They need it for this one. Okay. Okay. No problem. So this is actually the tip of the iceberg, because we know that there are much more mutations that are found in the tumor, and they are defined as variant of unknown significance. So you can see here a lot of mutation. This is and we don't know what to do with them. They write them in the appendix. And why is this important? We divide the mutation into 2 different types of mutation. There are somatic mutations that exist in the tumor itself, but not in the body, in all the cells of the patients. And there are germline mutations. So for the somatic mutation, around 80% of all mutations that we find in cancer genes are somatic. And this is important because we now know from, for example, one study of Razel Kurzrup in 2019, that if we treat more than we target by drugs more than 50% of the driver mutation of a tumor, then the survival is much better. So maybe we treat 2 mutations that we know about, but maybe those variant of unknown significance hide 2 or 3 more pathogenic mutations. We are just not aware of it because it's inside the forest of 30 different mutations. And not less important is the germline mutation. There are patients, 13% of cancer patients, sporadic cancer patients, carry an inheritable mutation, but 47 of them are carriers of variant of unknown significance in cancer genes. And we don't know to tell them whether they are in risk for additional cancer or their relatives are in risk for additional cancer. And I would like to give an example of how we try to address this problem. So cancer is caused by genetic mutations, And one of the most important genes in cancer is p53, which prevents mutation, and if there are too many mutation, it causes apoptosis, which is programmed death, programmed suicide for the cells, which prevent cancer. The cancer is smart, so in the fight between p53 and the cancer likes to select mutation that disrupt p53, and then the cancer wins. Indeed, 40 to 50% of tumor harbor p53 mutation, and I work with Professor Thierry Soucy, who is collaborated one of the leaders in the research of this gene. And some of the mutations are heritable and confer cancer risk. This is the Low-Froumeni syndrome, which is risk of 50% chance of cancer before the age of 30. What is the problem? You can see here the landscape of different mutation in cancer in this gene. This is the position. You can see that there are some hotspots that recurred many times in cancer. They are of course pathogenic, but many of them were mentioned in this database of 10,000 patients only once or twice. So is this a chance, by chance mutation, a neutral mutation, or a pathogenic mutation? And if it's found in a patient or inheritable mutation in a family, we don't know to tell the family anything. And importantly, most of the possible missense mutation in this gene are variant of unknown significance, which we don't know to tell the patient. So what we do, we selected to use machine learning. In machine learning we define a group of mutation that we are almost sure that they are cancer causing, another group of mutations that we are almost sure that they are neutral, not cancer causing. We collect a lot of information about them, and then we ask the computer to create a model to discern between these two groups, and then this model can be generalized to all other mutations that we don't know about. Now the problem is, and this is what important for me to show, the interface between the artificial intelligence and biology. Okay, so many people are impressed by the fact that in my lab, we know to do artificial intelligence, which is nice for medical people. Okay, but this is not the only issue. The biology is very, very, very important. So how we select them? So this one, the pathogenic group. The pathogenic group, actually, we can see the cancer gives us an opportunity, because usually in genetic diseases we have only the mutation of rare genetic diseases, but cancer is prevalent, and mutation that appear in somatic mutation in cancer can actually represent an experiment, so-called experiment of nature, of selecting cancer causing mutations. So if we take 4 different databases and select only the mutation that appear in all of them independently, then we can be quite sure that they are cancer causing. And indeed, if you see here, this group of mutations are more pathogenic, are more disrupting the cells as compared to this group. The next issue, which is even more challenging, is to select the neutral mutation. So we can say, okay, the mutation didn't appear in cancer thus far, that we investigated 20, 30 years, is neutral. But who says that in 3 years, when we'll have millions of patients with cancer genomes, we'll not find this mutation, that our algorithm will be wrong. And for this, p53, and this was the idea of my colleague, p53, if you take it, the mutation appearance, the new mutation appearance in history, you can see that after 2008 there is saturation. All the pathogenic mutations were already appeared in cancer. There are no new mutation. This we can assume maybe 95% of confidence that the mutation that didn't appear are neutral. And the data of each mutation consists of many computational scores, many yeast and in vivo cells scores that experimented all possible missense mutation. This is named the saturation mutagenesis. It exists for minority of genes, but for p53 it does exist. And now this is a nice computer game. It's actually true, it's statistics, it's really grounded, well grounded in mathematics, but as a biologist and physician we want more validation. So the first validation is a test set which was left 20% of the mutation that we know that they are positive or negative. They are 96% 96.5% accuracy of the prediction. In the ClinVar, in the leading cancer interpreting database that is used often by genetic consultation and oncologists, where we have only 190, but out of these 96 again are positive, our prediction is accurate. And a clinical validation, which we took a database TCG of 10,000 cancer patient mutation, we divided the patient into 4 groups. The first group is the patients without p53 mutation in green. The second group is patients with truncating, not missense, not point mutation, but mutation that harm all the genes. We are sure that they are pathogenic. And then all the point mutation, we divided them into the yellow, which we predicted to be non-deleterious, and the blue, which we predicted to be deleterious. And indeed, we can see that the mutation that we predicted to be deleterious go with the truncating, and mutation which we predicted to be non-deleterious are going with wild type. Okay, so this is a very independent validation. And the last validation is experimental. We took 41 mutations that we have interesting biological question about. We did our prediction, we transfected them with my colleague into human cells, and we selected and we showed that this is how a pathogenic mutation behaves. It causes proliferation of cells, and this is how wild type behaves, and we see that our predictions are correct. And we now apply this method to more and more cancer genes using variety of methods. Now here comes biology again. You know that artificial intelligence is not artificial and is not intelligence. The computer does what we ask it for. There is no mystics about it. And we told the computer to divide the mutation into pathogenic and non-pathogenic. So we forced the computer into assumption of dichotomy. The computer will not find anything else because we forced it into dichotomy. But is dichotomy correct? So here, and this is a paper under review, so I will just show some hints, and I will not elaborate on the method. This is a saturation mutagenesis database that showed the pathogenicity of all mutation, and one is very pathogenic. And this is our score, which is related to evolution and mutation prevalence, but I will not elaborate. I hope it will be accepted soon, and I'll be presented it the next time. And we can see that there is a group of very pathogenic mutation, group of neutral mutation. There are many weak drivers, and this is very important therapeutically. We validated it in survival and so on, but this is very important therapeutically. You can see that the stronger mutation, this is from a cell line encyclopedia, the stronger mutations needs much lower, are more sensitive to the relevant medication, which means that this stratification to weak driver, strong driver, and so on is also important therapeutically. So what we are planning to do it in Hadassah. So in Hadassah, we are fortunate to be one of the Sharet Institutes, one of the 4 centers in the world that were selected by Roche company for a very interesting collaboration. This is a collaboration led by Professor Aaron Popovtzer and Professor Eli Pikarsky, and I'm in charge of the scientific and computational parts of this project. And we will have a genomic profile for every cancer patient in Hadassah, 3,000 new patients every year, but we build around them a patient journey, a digital and structured patient journey database that is available also for single patient, for physician as an operative tool, but also for us all the treatment, the pathology, and all the clinical implication of the patient journey. And then we will use, and this is we're starting to do it today, we will use all the big data from pathology, from radiology, from treatments, from genomics, and for clinic, and try to cluster the patients according to sensitivity to drugs, even patients that are far apart from different diseases, from different genes, for different drugs. And then for each new patient, this is the vision which I hope will, for every new patient, we will tell this is your profile, you will need drug B, this is your profile, you will need drug A, and this is your profile, drug A actually will harm you. So this is that we try to use our artificial intelligence and all the tools that I described and more to develop this decision support tool. And these are the brilliant students that I'm fortunate to have, that all of them, aside one who comes from computer science, all of them are medical students, and 5 of them have or will have in 2 years a first degree in computer science or mathematics within with a degree with MD, and I'll be happy to take. This is the work of Gil Ben Cohen and PhD students, and Kobe Landau, who finished now his master's degree and is doing internship in medicine. So I would be happy to take 1 or 2 questions if we have time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shai. So now it's my pleasure to invite our next speaker, Erez Neiman. Erez is a physicist. He's the co-founder and the CTO for Scopio Labs. Scopio Labs has developed a platform for digital cell morphology. And Erez, please, we're happy to have you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Erez, as it was said. I'll start with a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on IP, and what I'll be talking about is my personal experience and the way we do things at Scopio. Some of it may be contrary to what Greg was talking about. Some of it may be a mistake. So be careful about what you use and adjust it also to your specific use case. Sorry if I cough a little bit. I recently got over COVID. At Scopio, first I'll take 2 minutes to explain what we do, because otherwise you won't understand why we do what we do with IP. And I'll talk about how we do things. So at Scopio, we developed a technology that enables you to scan and analyze microscopic samples at the highest resolution in the world. And with this, we're basically the platform for analysis of cell morphology at scale. And I'll talk about our focus for a second, because it is important for IP. And I was wondering if I should discuss it or not here, but I think it's important for our strategy. So our platform can scan and analyze, theoretically, any type of sample. And we decided to focus our energy on hematology. So CBC testing, complete blood count testing, hasn't really changed in about 50 years. And so you go and you get first-line testing, CBC, and after that, they go and look at it on a microscope or look at snapshots and snapshots of cells. And the problem is that a lot of the missing information is held in the cells, and the morphology of cells, the way they interact with the environment, so the abnormalities, the different ratios, and other different types of problems. But there was no technology to image and analyze them at high resolution. And this is what Scopio came with. So we developed technology for computational photography, so a super resolution, real-time super resolution technology that enables us to scan the entire sample at the highest resolution and also analyze it using AI. So we're a combination of hardware, software, AI application, all in one. And I think this is important because it brings up a dilemma. So as a company, we could look at ourselves as a company that developed the technology that enables us to scan samples and analyze them. And it's very broad and very general. But the more broad you go, the more difficult it is to get patents approved. So if you go very narrow and you say hematology, then great. It's a narrow field, and if it hasn't been done, then we have a strong case there. However, what if we pivot? What if we grow as a company? What if someone acquires us for the technology and wants to use it for another need? So you're always left with a dilemma, and I'll tell you how we decided to essentially focus on it, which is we go quite broad on the technology, things that are very, very strong patentable technology, and we try to go more narrow on things that relate more to software AI and applications to kind of try to get the best of both worlds if we can. Very briefly, just so you understand the hardware and software, I'm not going to dive into each application in depth, but we have 2 platforms using the same technology. One is called the X100. It's FDA approved, and it supports 3 slides. It's meant for small and medium hospitals. And the other one is the X100 HD, which stands for high throughput. It's pending FDA approval. It hasn't been approved yet, and it supports 30 slides. It's meant for larger facilities. Now, each of them can run different applications. So the first one, which is FDA NCE cleared, is the full field peripheral blood smear application. And that one is the first application in the world for scanning and analysis of blood, the blood smears. And it essentially, in the sense of the AI and everything, it's a decision support system. So it follows what a person could theoretically do, except it takes out a lot of the guesswork. It makes it significantly more efficient. It uses AI to analyze things. It never gets tired, never fights with its wife. It just creates a better workflow solution. The second application is the full field bone marrow aspirate application, which will be, hopefully, assuming it gets approved, the first ever tool for bone marrow analysis. We recently finished the clinical trial there. It is a step above what the peripheral blood smear application does, because we actually use the scanning and the analysis of just vast numbers of cells there. Because diseases in bone marrow can be focal. It's not distributed homogeneously like in peripheral blood. But it hasn't been approved yet, so just I'm clarifying the disclaimer there. And then there's future applications. So there's where we're going. And this comes up when you're a company in your strategy for IP, because you're always conflicted between protecting the near term of what you're doing and trying to go and expand beyond. Again, the broader you go, the more difficult it is to protect. So it's always a question, and it brings up another dilemma, which is how much energy and resources can you devote to this? You're a startup company. In the end, you also want to create a product and you want to sell it, and you have engineers and they need to be working on things other than IP. So there's dilemmas that come up there. So this relates to something I already discussed, so I'll be very brief. But in creating this, there were different steps in the life of the company as well. So in the beginning, we focused most of our energy on just the core technology. Just being able to do this high-resolution scanning that was never available was what we did at first. Because if that didn't work, it doesn't matter if we can do AI, right? And we didn't have the data at that point. What came after that is a lot of work that focused on the application in AI. And that's where we started going more in depth into software, into AI, etc. Again, I'm saying AI, I mean machine learning, but everyone understands here. And then there's the future possibilities where we're going, which is taking this technology and basically unleashing our full potential onto the world of medicine, meaning like using what we created as a core technology and approving in the FDA those next steps and future abilities that it brings. And the question is when to protect it, how to protect it, how much to devote now to protect something that I may or may not do in the future. So I'll talk about the components of IP inside Scopio, and of course, some of it is general and some of it is very specific. This, by the way, on the right shows the way we, like the super resolution, the colorful image was actually created from these low resolution images using our super resolution technology. So in strategy, there's first the question of what am I trying to achieve? Then there's the process that I put in place, which is how I want to achieve it. And then there's resources, which is how much am I willing to devote to this. So let's talk about the strategy at Scopio. And again, this is very, very personal to what we do and not necessarily applicable to every different company. So I'll start with a very broad statement that will anger some people, maybe, which is the patent office was created in an age where software and algorithms did not exist at all. And the criteria that is suggested and was described very well by Greg before was created in an age when there was only hardware. Different types of hardware, and many aspects. Hardware isn't just chips. It goes all the way from materials to medicine to everything, but no one thought of software and AI. And I would claim that the criteria isn't actually right for software and AI, because in software and AI, most of the work is actually the labor. A lot of the inventiveness, the innovation come in the labor of creating something that no one created before you, and not necessarily in doing it in a way that no one did before you. And this means that the criteria that was presented, in my opinion, my personal opinion, is not always the right way to judge patent. And it creates a lot of the dilemmas, which is why, as Tamar asked before, I think that if the percentage of software in our lives is growing very, very strongly exponentially. The fact that it grew with like about 10% in the percentage of patents, I think is a testament to the fact that this is actually very miscorrelated. So hardware is the classic strategy. And if you are able to defend it, it is a very strong protection. However, when you go to software and algorithms, I think there's a dilemma. And again, you can sometimes combine, and it's great, as I said, when you go narrow. But I'll talk for a second specifically about software. When I say very valuable, I mean in the direct way. So it's very difficult to show infringement, which makes it often difficult to protect. It's very important to focus on the process and not the implementation, in my opinion. But software and algorithms have two more values for a company that I think are not of the interest of the IP firm, but are very strong interest to the company. One is shareholder value. So when you have IP, venture capital and generally investors tend to look at it as an asset. And I'll be blunt, they don't always know if it actually is going to be an asset. And more blunt, you don't always know if it's going to be an asset. So I think that there's a value there that is important. And sometimes it's worth it for that. But sometimes it actually creates an actual value on top of that, which is your competitors don't know if you're going to get that patent. So after you file it and it was published, there's a period of like 2-3 years, sometimes it can be even longer, where no one knows if you're going to get that patent, but your competitors can read it online. And then they have to start asking themselves difficult questions. What do I do with it? What if he gets it? And I came out on the market with this, and then they can sue me. So suddenly they start thinking, they're going into their heads, trying to figure out what to do about something that you may have filed that may not pass. And that creates value. You have no way of measuring it. You don't know if it's going to happen, but sometimes it creates that value. So there's a process to try and understand if you think that it will be valuable, even if you can't show infringement. If you think that they won't be able to do it without it, they may think they have to solve it another way now, and then it's going to slow down their R&D. So that's actually a value, I think, for a company that we put emphasis on. And when you're talking about AI, I think the same rules apply. But I think you can, from what I've seen in the past, if you go narrow enough in your claims and you put actual details of what you're trying to protect, algorithms can pass as patents. But it is very important. It's going to be more revealing than you may have wanted it to be. So if it's worth it for you, and if you think that the algorithm itself, either you can hide the core or it's strong enough, then it's worth protecting, I think, as an algorithm as well. And we've done it. We've done all three types in our company. And I'll talk in a second about the process. Then there's a question of, are you trying to be more offensive or more defensive? Of course, it's always a mix. It's never 100 and 0. But I think the way I see it is the freedom to operate, FTO, is the most important thing. Because you're a startup company, and in the end, you need to create a product, and you need to have people using it. And if you did that, you're going to be successful. So you want freedom to operate so that you can be out there, and you may win. As long as no one can stop you, you can win on better product. But after that come other considerations of the IP. So one is how your competitors view it. So are they going to be aggressive with you? Do they view patents as important? Are M&A activities in your field based a lot on IP or not? And some fields are more historically reliant on that, and some aren't. The second is, and this is a very controversial statement, so I'll be careful with it, but it's how you view your exit strategy. And one, you don't know the future, but you do know how you're building your company. If you're building it in your mind more towards an M&A or more towards an IPO. And it does lead to a different balance between the two. And I'll explain why, because I don't think it's trivial. In an M&A, the most important thing is that there's no legal action against you. If there's a risk going up against you, no one's going to buy you. They're going to wait to see if you win or you don't win, the lawsuit. And so you want to be more defensive. You want to be very safe and make sure that your FTO is very strong. But if you're going for an IPO, you're going to grow. You're going to start acquiring others. You're going to be there long term, and other players are going to move into the field. And you have to survive on your own. So you have to be able to play aggressively if and when needed, because you're now the David going into the field of Goliaths, right? So you need to be able to sometimes hurl a rock in their directions. And so you want to build a portfolio that includes also offensive patents in your thinking process. So how do we do it at Scopio? The first thing is we do not treat IP as a one-off event. So it's not the engineer that comes up with, oh, I made up this idea, maybe we can patent it. We have an IP forum with members that have been trained by, we went through a session with IP legal counsels, and we learned about the considerations. And it's the same team that writes all of the different patents, so they understand how the patent office thinks. We get the rejections back and the comments from the examiner and everything. So we learn, and we keep the same team long term. As far as possible, of course, people move companies sometimes. Luckily, no one from our IP forum left so far. And then we sit in that forum, and first thing is we file provisionals. And we're very liberal with our provisionals, but we're very, very strict with our rules of our provisional. So the first thing is it has to have some value for us. So it doesn't matter from the USPTO point of view at this point, it's will it benefit us in any of the ways that I described before. Second is we do look at the criteria that the USPTO or other regulatory bodies look at, and we try to understand, will it stand, right? Because in the end, we don't want to waste our energy and time if it's not going to stand. And infringement shows with an asterisk, because as I said before, sometimes certain patents, we know that we won't be able to show infringement on, but we still pursue them because they will make other people's lives difficult. But typically, we notice that if we require this of ourselves, we tend to find ways of drafting the claims that help us show infringement. So if you view it as a core essential part of a patent, you find ways, because you start asking yourselves, what would I look for? And it relates to what Greg said about reverse engineering, and we find ways to do it, and it actually changes our patents around by requiring it. And then we wait with the decision as late as possible, because we get to see what everyone else is doing, what's coming out there, what's coming out in academia, and we write our patent to the most up-to-date situation that we have available to us in the competitive landscape, in the world, and in our strategy. Like maybe we'll pivot, right? 6 months in, we decided this isn't important. And it's happened many times in the past that we filed something and then we figured out that it's not the right way to do it. And if a competitor actually, like if we filed it and a competitor tried to do it, they would fail anyway. So why would we protect it, right? We failed and we assumed that we're smarter. So last slide is resources. So be stage appropriate is a really important piece. As a startup company, in the beginning, money is really expensive. You raise the seed round, and patents are expensive. The lifetime cost of a patent can be around $50,000. You know, drafting a good patent is about $10,000. Then you have filing fees and ongoing fees, and again, the numbers vary, of course. But when you're a small startup, like you have to be very careful about what you file. But as you grow, you have the ability to adjust your strategy, to file patents that you wouldn't file before, to devote more energy inside your organization. So when you're 5 engineers at the beginning and someone has to sit and write patents, then 20% of your workforce just went out the window. When you're 100 people in the company, you can choose to have a person that does mostly IP, and it could be totally worth it. So being stage appropriate, I think, is really important. A lot of companies, create an IP strategy in the beginning, and they tend to continue running with it. And because of the IP forum, we find ourselves re-examining what should be our strategy again and again every 6 months or so. And it changes, it evolves all the time. I spoke about dedicated people. And the last thing is IP is not just your strategy. It's, as I said before, about competitors, but you're going to be surprised. So one of the examples in our case, and this will be the last point for this presentation, is that we found out that a potential competitor had a portfolio from an academic portfolio, and they were in a, let's call it an unstable financial state, and they made it available. And we found that we could license it for FTO purposes. We didn't need it for our own, but we realized that if we filed it for FTO purposes, it would strengthen our ability to go broad with different things. And so we used that opportunity, and it cost us, of course, money and energy and time, but it was out of the budget we intended, and yet one of the best decisions I think we've ever made, and to license that portfolio. So I think with IP, you have to constantly keep your eyes open and see, because everyone around you is also changing their IP strategy. And threats and opportunities are going to rise. And I think as a company, the IP forum is my number one takeaway. Have that IP forum. When you have people that are mindful of IP, they will bring the value with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erez.
One question from me. From what we know, patent is published only 18 months after you did the first provisional. And you're talking all the time about knowing what's there and looking at your competition. How do you deal with this 18-month gap of this is a black hole that everybody has the same?
So there are several ways. First of all, sometimes there's a black hole, but there are many different situations where it actually operates a little bit different. So one is a lot of things come from academia, and they publish. So even though they filed beforehand, they publish what they did, and some company may license it, so you know what's happening and you know who talks to who, because people talk. That's one. Second is some of your competitors may be public companies, and for their reasons, for their share value, they may reveal information that they could have kept silent because it serves them. It serves them in other ways, but it also serves us. So basically, by just keeping your ears open, and if you're dealing with a private company that creates its own IP, then yes, usually you'll just find out about it when it is revealed, or when they start talking about a coming product, and you start understanding there's no way they did that without having this, because we're in the same field and we have the same problems. So we start understanding there's clues in there. So it's a little bit of detective work, and sometimes you're just really surprised out of the blue with something.
Thank you very much, Erez, for a very interesting presentation. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Dror Zur. Dror, you can start sharing your screen. Dror is the CEO of Magentic Eye. Magentic Eye is a company that combines deep learning, and computer imaging in endoscopic procedures. And we are particularly happy to have Dror here with us today because Hadasit Hospital was the beta site for testing the technology that Magentic Eye developed. And that was in collaboration with Dr. Harold Jacobs from the gastroenterology unit. So Dror, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And yes, exactly as we have said, we are very happy. And I'm very happy to present here in this forum, especially because of the really special connection and a company that we have with Hadasit. So as said, I'm Dror Zur, the CEO of Magentic Eye, and we are a company which develops automatic polyp detection and analysis system. We call it the Magentic Colo, which these days also being expanded to be an AI suite for the gastroenterologist. And it will be Magentic Colo and the Magentic Gastro. The magenta color has already a CE mark with first users in Israel, including Hadasit, by the way, and Europe, and is after a very successful and big multi-center international in the US, Europe.
אתה לא בשare screen. Share your screen.
I'm sharing my screen, I think, but I will try. Oh, sure. Sorry. Oh, sorry. But I was still on slide number 1.
Okay,
but you heard
great.
me, right?
Yes, yes.
I didn't change any slide yet. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll continue. So as I said, the magenta color has already a CE mark with first user in Israel, including Hadasit, and in Europe, and is after a very successful and big multi-center international in the US, Europe, and Israel pivotal study with 10 centers and 952 patients. And as part of our experience, we had filed already 4 patents. 3 of them are already granted, and 2 more are now under preparation. So I would be happy to share with you some of our consideration and debates. I will first say a few words about AI in general, and then I will talk about it from the patent point of view according to our experience. And I would like to say that we are not patent experts, but I'm sharing with you from our experience and work with patent experts. So now I will begin with the specific subject that we are talking about. I took some terms I found. They are not necessarily, by the way, the best definitions, but at least I think they convey the main idea behind it, which we might need for this talk. So let's say, what is AI in general? So we're talking about artificial intelligence, which refers to simulation of human intelligence in machines that are programmed to think like humans and mimic their actions. The term may also be applied to any machine that exhibits traits associated with human minds, such as learning and problem solving. What is AI in medicine? So we can say that artificial intelligence in medicine is the use of machine learning models to search medical data and uncover insights to help improve health outcomes and patient experiences. And what we can say about AI in medical imaging, because we are, for example, a company in the medical imaging domain. So the use of artificial intelligence in diagnostic medical imaging is undergoing extensive evaluation. AI has shown impressive accuracy and sensitivity in the identification of imaging abnormalities and promises to enhance tissue-based detection and characterization. And actually much more than this, but I won't get into it in this talk. What processes are we talking about when we're talking about AI? So usually people will talk mainly about big data, machine learning, and deep learning. I will say a few words about the difference between machine learning and deep learning, but let's first see what is the difference between deep or machine learning and the classical algorithms that were used before. So classical or traditional algorithm takes some input and some logic in the form of a code, a recipe that was given in advance by the developer, and drums up the output. As opposed to this, a deep machine learning algorithm takes an input and output and gives them some logic based on the relations, the learning phase. So it takes pairs of input and output and learns the relation. And produce accordingly some logic. So this is what it produced. And this logic can then be used to work with any new input to give an output based on the relations that were learned. This is the prediction. And we call it the inference phase. So mainly we have usually learning phase and inference phase. And I can give a very short or I think a good example that demonstrates it. I will talk about lesion detection in imaging, medical imaging. So at the left side, you see the structure of a classical algorithm. The input is the medical image, and then come the recipe, like the algorithm, what to do. It will do usually segmentation, like to segment the brain from the rest of the image. Feature extraction. There will be some algorithms that will scan the image and extract some features from each location of the image, and then feature selection, the specific features that we think are relevant to this detection task, and then will come a classifier, which according to the value of this feature in each location in the image will decide if this location is a lesion or not. So this is like the process of a classical algorithm. On the right side, you will see how it is seen when applying a deep learning algorithm into it. So all we have is the input and the output. Examples of input and the output. The input would be the image, and the output would be where the location of the lesion is in the image. By training the system, the learning phase, on many examples like that, we will produce a logic which will be in this box. That after that, when it will get an image, it will say if there is a lesion, and if there is, where it is. And actually, if we're talking about machine learning, what I've said that I also will mention, if it's not a deep learning, so sometimes in this example, also this process of training the system on couples of input and output would be only to replace this classifier. So the input will be features that were selected on the image, and the output would be where the lesion, and the classifier, machine learning classifier, will be trained on such examples. So machine learning, which is not deep learning, usually replace only part of the whole solution. Machine learning usually will replace like a deep part, I would say, or expanded part of this solution to the problem. So let's talk now about patents and AI. Let's think what, for example, can be patented in such an AI process. So if you have something innovative in the learning process, usually it can be patented. If you have something innovative in the inference process, it can also be patented. Innovative implementation of your AI method or algorithm for the specific problem or domain that you are solving can also be patented. Innovative algorithms supporting the AI in order to make it something practical, like a real problem solver, can also be patented. The specific user interface, UX, UI, to support the AI system can also be patented. And there are additional things. We are less involved in such things, but if you, for example, develop a special hardware components or hardware which support AI software, for example, to make it running faster or in an optimized way, or in a specific way, it can also be something innovative that can be patented. And if you're doing something with the data which make it safer or treating its security in an innovative way, of course, it also can be patented. So I will now show example for each of the relevant cases. So if we're talking about the learning process, so for example, the training, data preparation is something that can include many innovative things that can be patented. For example, if you have an innovative way to balance your positive and negative samples in the training data, if you have a special method to label it in either efficient way or a special way, if you have something to make your training data more standardized, which is very important for AI companies in many cases, it also can be patented. If you have special way to encode the data, either for security or for more efficient processing, also something that can be innovative and patented. If you generate in a special way synthetic training data, many companies has issues with collecting the data, at least at the beginning and also later on. You need big data, as we have said, and not always it is available. So if you have a special way to create synthetic data which imitate the real data, this is also something that can be patented. Loss function is an important function in the process of the learning phase. And if you have something new about this loss function, it can also be patented. Additional, just an example, a neural network that was trained on from data from general domain, and it is subsequently transformed by training based on data from specific domains. This occurs in many times. You do fine tuning and transformation to your neural network. You have a special way to do that in an innovative way. This can also be patented. About the inference process, so we can talk about the model itself, of the architecture. So if, for example, you invented a new neural network architecture, or you took a neural network architecture and you change it to be something different and innovative, of course, it can be patented. Novel type of hybrid models, for example, a group of homogeneous neural network working collectively, if you have a special way to do that, innovative way. Ensemble of networks can also be sometimes something that can be patented. It is done to do something really innovative about the way you do that. Another example, a novel hierarchical model, like novel type of federated learning, something that can also be patented. Now about innovative implementation of AI for a specific domain of problem solving. So I will give the example of our case. So we are using, for example, now in our system, AI models for automatic polyp detection, for polyp size estimation, for polyp characterization, and the focus is of course of AI, but we have a whole system around it. And you can see, for example, here we have this box is the AI model, and then we have additional classical algorithm running in parallel to support it. And we also have a pre-processing. The image is not getting actually directly into the AI model, but it goes through a pre-processing algorithm, and we have also a post-processing algorithm. Take the final decision also based on additional things like temporal stuff and things like that. And we also have background algorithm like a tracking algorithm and stuff like that. And if this as a whole to make it something which is practically solving a very complex problem, like I think what at least was our problem. So if you do it, this combination and the way that they work together, synchronize together and stuff like that in an innovative way, so there can be something patented, but that can be patented. But I have to say that here you have to be very careful, because if the thing that you are doing, each one of them can be taken from other domain and together in a relatively trivial way, can be understood, can be similar to what you are doing. So you not really have something innovative, but you have to be, I would say, somewhat careful when you want to patent something like that. I can show you an example of a system made of the architecture that just I showed you. And immediately as the polyp has appeared, the polyp is detected, and the bounded box is the way to convey it to the physician while the procedure is taking place. And this is another example. Here we have not only detection, but also size estimation. Here the left side says it is hyperplastic, and the red one here says it is adenoma, which is dangerous type of polyp. And here we have also size estimation, whether the polyp is less than 5 millimeter, between 5 to 10, or more than 10 millimeter. Two additional very important piece of information for the gastroenterologist. And actually here we see in parallel 3 heavy models running together in a synchronized way, the detection, the size, and the characterization, and giving, in one shot, all the information in real time to the physician, to the gastroenterologist. Here we switch to a full mode, so you still have the information, but in a textual way, because it is in the video. The physician preferred to see the video on the whole screen and not the additional information, so we put it on the video. So let's talk about also innovative algorithms supporting the AI. So I can once again talk about our cases. So we have also pre-processing algorithms, post-processing algorithm, and some background algorithms. Here I show you a flow chart of background algorithm, which is a tracking algorithm, tracks the polyps, and it is also something which is patented. This is the flow chart of the algorithm itself. It runs in the background of the algorithm and in a synchronized way, and give information to the system, and the system use it when it is needed. And let's say also a few words about the GUI, the UI, the UX UI that support the AI system. So I've brought here 3 examples, I think, which can demonstrate maybe how the thing can also be defined in an innovative way. So this is, for example, the use of our tracking algorithm. And this is the polyp. And the polyp is getting close, and this is a frame by frame. We show a sequence of frames. So the polyp is getting close to the left edge of the image, to the left border of the image, is getting close, and then it disappears. But once it disappears, because we track it, we let the physician know, in this case, where the polyp is. Like not only where it gets out of the frame, we continue to track it out of the frame, and with this vector, we continue to show to the physician where it is. And then it gets back into the frame, so the arrow disappears, and we now detect it again. So the way to show to the physician where it is out of the frame, something that can be patented. You would want probably to say something as general as possible at the beginning, let's say showing the direction of where the polyp is out of the frame, and then say something maybe more specific, or to put some specific example, like do it in with a vector of direction and stuff like that. Here is another example. This is a scan of the colon, and what we suggest here to put in the GUI this is for one of our future versions, is to show a trajectory of how the scope went through the column. This is the beginning, it goes through the column till the end and then get back. So a different color for getting in, a different color for getting out. And also we put ellipses where polyps were detected and also specific signs if it was removed or not. So to show it in such a way, once again, it's something innovative that can be patented for this specific, I would say, problem of what we want to convey here. And once again, you would want probably to say something in general, showing trajectories, or showing special signs and stuff like that, and then give specific example of how we suggest to do it. This is the third thing which we already saw, even the gouges, to show the hyperplastic or adenoma and the size group of the polyp is something that can be patented to show it in this way. And you can think once again about something more general to show it to the physician, like let's say in a bar or gouge, and then about specific example how to do that. So if I would try, yeah.
You have like 1 more minute left.
I think I will need
And
even
there
less.
is a question from the audience.
Okay, but I think I just finished with this slide, which is the last slide.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so to summarize, I showed you, I think, a few examples from our experience, and I tried to put it like in an ordered way. But some points that maybe we can also consider to think about is like there is also a trade-off between, in your claims mainly, between being specific to secure your patent and to be as broad as possible to have a protected patent. And you have to play with this trade-off, and your patent lawyer or expert will help you with that probably. There is an option for continuation patents, and this is if your patent was granted and everything was described in the body of the patent, but you want to update your claims because usually it takes time until it is granted, and maybe you think a different thing, you want to emphasize a different thing, then you have usually a window of opportunity to do that before it is finally granted. And as I've mentioned, we always have to think what we want to emphasize in our IP file. And these are the things that we went through, that we reviewed, like the learning process in case of AI, learning process, inference process, the way of implementing it for our domain, supporting algorithm, UX, UI, maybe additional things. Yeah, so that is from my side.
Thank you, Dror.
Hi, Dror, do you see me?
Yeah, well, let me open.
I'm just here. I have a question.
Yeah, I see you.
I have a question. Right, in the face. How exactly did you build your strategy? Like, did you know from the very beginning that you need to have this patent in order to do the fundraising? Can you share any kind of thoughts and considerations, or you were just straightforward, you had advice from a friend? How eventually it helped you bring the money into the company? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, I have to say. I came to this startup as a founder with some experience in the industry. I already had, I think, something like 25 years of experience in, first it was in the army, which is less relevant from the patent point of view, maybe, but and then mainly in the medical industry, in startups, but also in global companies. So the first thing I can once again, I'm talking from my experience. I was looking around. I think I'm quite a curious guy, so I was looking around and see what happenings, and I also had I think something like 3 patents or 4 before in other companies. And I understood the important, and I personally even think that IP for a startup, which is, the question is what type of startup you are, but if you are a deep technology startup, I think IP is important. And I also understood that it is an important asset to the company, and that, at the beginning, and I think it's something that really accompany you through the whole life of the company. It depends on what stage of the company you are, but at the beginning, it really can help you to bring investments to the company. But at the end, investors are looking at it not just because investors should look at it, because at the end of the day, there is something behind it, because they understand that it can be an helpful asset for the company in the continuation. And then you reach a phase in which you see that it really can help you, because competitors arises if they were not there from the beginning, and you begin to look what they are doing, what do you have, and you begin also. We have also done, for example, an FTO. FTO is a freedom to operate analysis, because we want to be sure that we don't infringe anything, or if we infringe, that to know that, maybe to contact. And happily, we currently have very good freedom, but we also have very good coverage of what we are doing. So they think that really in practice, they can help. And the startup should think if, sometimes it can be something very practical. You can identify someone that is really doing something similar to you. And if you have a patent, and if you took care of it from the beginning, and we took care of it really from the very beginning. So we have like precedents from 2015, for example, for some of our patents. Then you really, it can be used by you, or someone who is interested in you can know that it is something else. So this is in a nutshell, I would say. I hope I answered that question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dor, for a very interesting presentation. And now, last but not least, I would like to introduce our next speaker, patent attorney Idit Sokol. Idit is the co-founder of the firm Kohn, De Vries and Stadler. She has many years of experience drafting patents and also giving advice to startup companies, VC companies. Please, Idit.
Well, thank you, Adriana, and thank you, Masha. Actually, your question leads us directly to this talk, and my talk will actually correlate to each and every one of our previous speakers, because what I'm going to talk about today is exactly how do you get the money. What does an investor look at when he looks at a potential investment in a new startup or in a new venture? So I will be presenting the venture capital's point of view. If it works. No, it doesn't work. Let's see. No, it doesn't. Masha will do that. Okay. So basically, what we're looking at when we are looking at a new venture, or when an investor looks at a new venture, he looks at exactly how can we obtain commercial success, right? So commercial success is all about the competitive advantage. Does the company have some sort of competitive advantage over its competitors in the market in general? And it's finding the correct scheme of how to beat the competitors, but still maintain as much rights in the company as possible. Masha? Now, if you look at the VC goals, of course, we want to have a successful investment. So what is a successful investment? Basically, the first thing we want to look at is how do we maximize our return on investment, right? We put money into the company. How do we maximize it? So how do we create and maintain value in a very competitive world, in a very competitive field, especially in medical devices, and especially in the algorithm landscape? Because we saw in Greg's presentation how many patents are actually granted and how many patents are prosecuted each year in this field. So one of the ways to look at it is how do we use this IP to create and to maintain the value in the company. The next thing is how to maintain exclusivity in the technology. One of the ways to maintain exclusivity is, of course, to build a proper IP portfolio to help us to monetize on the company's assets. The next thing is, of course, to create effective barrier of entry to competitors and to curb competitors' competitions. IP can be a very helpful tool in doing that, in order to, to create a barricade or to create walls against competition, because it disrupts whatever a competitor may be doing or maybe in the field of development is doing. Another thing is to hedge against technology and R&D risks, right? Because we saw that a company has maybe one track of development, but it also can have several other tracks of development. And using this IP, we can actually use it to hedge against R&D risks or technology risks. The basic thing that an investor will look at first and foremost is the correlation between the business plan of the company and the IP strategy, if there is an IP strategy. I've encountered many cases in which a company goes to the road, try to get investments coming in, but they don't have any kind of IP strategy built in. An investor will first and foremost look at the IP strategy, what has been done and how it correlates to the business plan, the current business plan of the company, and the future plans of the company, because companies do change and business plans do change. We look at the relevance of the IP to the business model. As we said, how can the IP serve the business model, and how can the IP actually benefit to the business model? How do we correlate between the IP and the R&D plans? Is the IP going hand in hand with the R&D process? Is some sort of diversity in the IP needed because of different R&D paths in the company that the company is looking at? So we need to look at that correlation. We also look at monetization, how enforceable our patents are. Okay, because we heard previously Erez talk and Greg about the possibility to make money from patents. Patents can be monetized if they can be enforced. So how does our patent live in this competitive landscape, and how do we enforce our patent, and can we monetize on such enforcements? We also look at, of course, blocking competitions. How does the IP effectively block competition by the scope of it? What does it protect? How strong is the protection we have? We will see an example in a very short while. We also look at how to monetize off-focus IP, because companies, especially new companies, create a lot of data. New companies and new ventures create mostly data. They don't create as much products as they create data and knowledge. And sometimes we have IP assets or patents that are not in the main focus of the company, but they can be monetized by out-licensing, for example, by selling the relevant patents to somebody else who's interested in it. And of course, we look at the balance between the IP assets that the company has. The company has many assets, the two most important of which are patents, of course, and trade secrets or know-how. And the investor will look at the balance between these two assets, these two main assets. There are other IP assets also, but they have a less significance in high technology based companies. And the whole issue is how do you balance these two types of IP assets? Because, and I hear it a lot from companies who are dealing with algorithms, they say, well, we don't know if it's patentable and we want to keep it as a trade secret. Relying, basing your entire strategy on trade secrets or just relying on know-how is a business today. Because first of all, we live in a very highly regulated world, okay? Especially in the medical devices field, everything is regulated, data is being exposed. Okay. Basically, most of the data is being exposed through regulatory processes, okay? We have to file data to different legislations, and data is being exposed. So by the mere exposure of the regulatory data, okay, know-how is being exposed and trade secrets can be exposed as well. Another thing to look at is today, the workforce is very fluid. You have one worker working for you today, he comes out and then works for your competitor tomorrow. And the data that is within the worker's head, you cannot take it out. Okay, so the data goes with the worker and you can sign in whatever non-competition agreements that you would like. It's not effective and it's not enforceable in court in most cases. So relying only on the data that resides in your worker's head as know-how is a risky thing to do. And many companies do not imply proper confidentiality rules or regulations or procedures within the company. So a lot of the data is being exposed unintentionally. Reverse engineering is also an issue. Whatever can be reverse engineered cannot be maintained as a trade secret because somebody can reverse your technology and see exactly what was done. So it cannot be kept as a trade secret. So do not rely only on trade secrets. It's a very, very risky thing to do. So what do? We go to patents. Okay, and that's the main thing an investor will look at. You will look at your patent portfolio or your IP assets. And the basic thing that an investor will do is a due diligence process. Now, the main part of the due diligence process or the IP due diligence process that an investor will do, he will do sorts of a SWOT analysis that we all know, but with a specific focus on IP issues. For example, he will look at the strength of the IP portfolio. Do the patents present a substantive barrier of entry to competitors? Is it a valuable asset? Is it sufficiently broad to cover not only what the company does, but as Erez truly said, what other people can do with your technology? Because you have to remember that patents are not a positive right. They're a negative right. A patent prevents somebody else from doing what you got a patent on. Okay, it's a very different thing. So when you're looking at a patent, it's not only on protecting what you do, but also looking at the technology and looking at what your competitor will be able to do with the technology in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, and trying to protect that in a patent application. So from this, you can have a look at the broadness of the scale of the claims, okay, or the broadness of the patent. Does it actually prevent somebody else from coming into your technological field? Are the rights enforceable? Are trade secrets or valuable? Okay, we'll see that in the opportunities as well. We also look at the weaknesses. Are there gaps in the technology, or are there gaps in the IP? Okay, can something be done to improve the IP position of the company by creating more patents, by maybe filing continuation applications, as we heard from the previous speaker? Can know-how be maintained if we want to rely on know-how, or certain aspects are maintained as know-how? Are they properly maintained within the company? We also look at opportunities, of course. What sort of measures can we take to maximize our IP value? Again, maybe filing continuation applications to broaden the scope. Maybe we have some sort of monetization of off-focus IP, as we talked about before. Is there any know-how that we can convert to a valuable IP asset, to file a patent on something that we thought about maintaining as know-how, but can be patented and can be used as an opportunity to broaden the scope of protection that the company has? And of course, we also look at threats. Mostly, as we heard previously, we mostly look at third parties' rights, what is called freedom to operate. We have to make sure that the venture has the freedom to do its business in the field, and it does not, infringe on anybody else's patents. Does the company have all sorts of related patents? Okay, maybe the company is relying on a licensed technology by somebody else that gives us all sorts of limitations on the deal. Is there any know-how leakage, of course, that we need to hedge, and also, and many other things that we do as part of this SWOT analysis? We want to look at the IP and its meaning in investment. Now, if you look specifically at the AI and algorithm-based technologies, it's all about the value, the assessment of value of the patent. Okay, because there are many patents out there on algorithms, there are many patents on AI technologies, but are they really of value? So the investor will look at 3 main points. The first one, again, as discussed, is the scope. Is the scope relevant to what the company does now? Is the scope relevant of what the company is planning to do as part of its R&D ventures? Or is the scope relevant to somebody else so we can monetize on our inventions, on our IP? Okay, what can a third party do with the technology? Does it have the potential of falling within our patents or not? Okay, so that's the scope. We also look at frequent practice changes, because a patent process takes many years from filing to grant, and during that time, the practice in patent offices change. So we look at what are the prospects. If we have pending patent application, we look at what are the prospects of getting a patent granted, and what is the foreseen scope of the patent that can be granted, and does the patent application have the desired scope, or maybe something should be done in order to change it or to modify it if possible. And we also look at the enforceability issue. Again, as we heard before, can infringement be proven in a competing product, or can the rights be enforced? And these are 2 different topics that we look at as part of this due diligence process, and they determine very much the value of the patent itself. Because a patent that is hard to enforce, or a patent in which we cannot prove infringement, has less value than a patent for which we actually can prove infringement of a competitor, and we can go and attack them in court and maybe get some royalties, or maybe stop them from doing business altogether. And let's look at a very generic example on patent enforceability. Let's see a generic claim that we see all the time. We have a system that has 3 components. We have the clients, we have the server, and we have something in the cloud that's doing the computational thing. And this is a typical claim that we see: a system for purpose X to do something, comprising a server and a plurality of client computerized devices, the server being linked to each of the clients through a network. Nice, very nice. Perhaps we will be able to get a patent on this claim. However, this patent is not enforceable. This claim, we cannot enforce it by any way, because the way the claim is drafted, we have 3 different infringers, each one of them doing only a part of this process. If you don't have a single infringer, if there's no one that is doing the entire scope of your claim, you don't have an infringer. And this patent cannot be enforced, okay? Because you can't catch an infringer. So with careful crafting of the claims, as we heard from Greg, proper measures can be taken to make sure that your patent is enforceable, that you will be able, on the one hand, to get a patent, but it can be also be enforced and can stop infringing acts. It's all about the claims, as Greg said. In the world of today, you have to know how to craft your claims in order to get the maximum possibility to catch infringers as you go along. And the last thing we'll see, it's the freedom to operate. Okay, this is a very, very important part of the due diligence process that the investor will look at. Does the company have the freedom to operate or do its business in view of somebody else's already granted patents or already granted rights? So we look at 2 main things. First of all, we have to remember that in the world of today, injunctions are very, very rare. Courts do not go giving out the injunctions to stop somebody else from doing business so quickly. So FTO becomes more of a business issue. Can we mitigate if an FTO issue arises? Can we mitigate it from the business perspective? Can we approach the owner of the patent and get a license on it? Can we buy the patents? Can we do some sort of reverse engineering to go around the patent? So it becomes a business issue and not a legal issue per se. Also need to remember that in most cases, systems are complex. And in order to do a proper FTO and to have a bulletproof vest around your technology, you have to break down your technology into many, many elements and check if you have FTO issues in each and every one of these elements. This is an impossible thing to do because systems are complex. So what we need to do is to focus on key elements of the technology and look at them, because otherwise we will find ourselves in an impossible task trying to clear everything out in the process. We also, besides looking at third parties' patents, which are the main risk in FTO issues, we also look at related parties' rights. It's not patent, but rights. Do any kind of third parties that the company has relations with, okay, can it pose an FTO risk? For example, a company uses advisors. Does the advisor have some sort of rights in the technology? Does the advisor have patents on its own? Commercial partners, former employees may have rights in the technology that is not acknowledged. Licensees and licensors, of course. Are there any kind of limitations through agreements that the company has done? Okay, maybe other investors, maybe advisors that can have part of the technology or part of the assets. So all of this is going into the due diligence process, and all of this can have an impact on the value of the IP and on actually the possibility of an investor to go into the deal and actually invest money in the company. So if we look just to sum up what is actually involved in the due diligence process and what will an investor look at when going into a potential investment deal, is first of all, we will look at what was done. What was done to generate value from the IP point of view, which is looking at the status of the existing IP that the company has. And of course, going to, as we discussed, the correlation between the IP strategy that the company has and its business plan, whether the IP strategy suits the business plan, maybe the IP strategy should be changed. And I commend Erez on doing this IP forum or IP meetings, because IP strategy needs to be changed frequently, and IP strategy is something that you have to look at every few months, depending on the status that the company is, on the stages of the R&D, on the stages of development, and the IP strategy should go hand in hand with that. Okay, so all of the time, look at the IP strategy, look at how you can revise it to modify it to suit your business plan, to suit your actually business status at that specific point in time. And the other thing the investor will look at is what we can do, what can be done with the assets. Other two, by looking inward to increase the value or improving the IP that already exists in the company, or looking outward in how do we get money from it, either by enforcement or by monetization of giving rights to somebody else. That was me. Questions?
Yeah. For doing work for VCs that are investing within Israeli startup companies, how many deals, or in percentage or in general, are really going bad because of IP issues?
Unfortunately, a lot. The Israeli mentality of going fast and going strong does not always, go to the benefit of the companies themselves, because sometimes, and in most cases, especially in the field of algorithmics, many companies start the IP process too soon. They start from a starting point which they don't have a real understanding of the technology, they don't have a real understanding of what they have, and trying to, obtaining IP assets which are not relevant to their actual business can damage the possibility to get an actual investment, because the investor will look at what can I do, and how is the company protected, and how is the company protected in its field of business and the relevance to the technology. If the patents that maybe you got great patents, but they're not relevant to the business because it was too early, they're not going hand in hand in your actual state of R&D or actual state of the product that you're going to sell. Unfortunately, we see too many cases. But on the other hand, we do have cases in which a company comes with a very bad patent portfolio, but the company has enough know-how and have enough assets and enough R&D processes, enough creative people inside that you can actually take this know-how and turn it into a valuable patent. And then actually a deal can come along, because you tell the investor, look, I looked at the patent portfolio is not worth a lot. But if you do some sort of measures in the company to take this know-how and convert it into valuable patents, then you will get valuable protection. And many deals have been based on that, not on the actual patents that were in the company at the day of investment, but on the potential of what the company can have based on its actual knowledge. Yes. It can, because mainly what the VC is looking at, of course, is again increasing ROI. So in many cases, people from the VC will be taking part of the decisions going forward. There may be some milestones that are built into the investment agreement. So the company needs to do this and that according to the VC in order to get the next step of the investment. So the VC does have some sort of way to influence the IP status of the company and the IP assets of the company. To tell you that we see that a lot, not too much, but we do encounter cases in which the VC dictates actually certain milestones and certain achievements in the IP field that the company needs to have in order to get the next quota of investment.
Thank you, Edith, for a very interesting presentation. And we are coming to the end of our seminar. I'd like to thank all the speakers today. We gained very valuable information. Thank you, Erez and Edith, for coming here. Dr. Rosenberg had to leave already. And thank you very much for all the participants, the people who are here and the people who attended through Zoom. Thank you, Masha, for producing this seminar. And we value very much this kind of opportunity to bring together inventors and researchers and doctors and companies and patent attorneys. And Hadasit, of course, likes or enjoys being a space where people can come together and collaborate. Thank you.